and your body started consuming...
It goes after muscle tissue and fat, and then it switches to your organs. You really start to feel the muscle tissues when your body's eating it. It really becomes painful everywhere.
To understand whether fasting destroys our muscle, we need to look at the stories of 3 different people. What's weird is one guy fasted for 392 days, but the guy who fasted for only 44 days had a lot more problems than him. In fact, if this guy lost muscle at the same rate that this guy did, he would have died. So what made the difference? To investigate the 5 big pitfalls with fasting, whether you're doing 3 or even 10 days, let's start in 1910 with the story of Claire Williamson. Claire and her sister Dora Williamson had been excitedly reading about a Dr. Linda Hazard, who was saying fasting could cure pretty much anything.
You'll feel happily free, but captivating.
And that she was the only licensed fasting expert in the world.
One of Hazard's triumphs was allegedly curing a 65-year-old woman of depression and chronic constipation with a 43-day fast.
Around this time, fasting was becoming popular. Dr. Edward Dewey of the University of Michigan was promoting both intermittent fasting and prolonged fasting in his 1900 book, The No Breakfast Plan and the Fasting Cure.
He claimed that farmers who skipped breakfast miraculously had more strength for their work. He also described various people curing all kinds of ailments with long fasts. Many fasted for over 2 weeks, and one man fasted for 60 days.
In December of 1910, Claire Williamson wrote a letter to supposed fasting expert Linda Hazard, asking if Hazard could cure Claire's long-standing uterine issues. Hazard replied saying that yes, she could permanently cure Claire's troubles with her fasting cure. Claire and her sister Dora were eager to get started on their cure, so while awaiting their trip to see Linda Hazard, they began on a meager diet of mostly just vegetable broth and breads in December of 1910. Almost 3 months later, on February 27, 1911, the two sisters finally got to meet the 43-year-old Linda Hazard in person. Without any sort of examination, tests, or even a questionnaire, Linda Hazard immediately began the sisters on a strict fasting regimen, which included plenty of exercise, excessively forceful massages, and unusually long enema sessions, up to 2 or 3 hours.
Right away, this sounds like an awful idea. People suffer more sluggishness and muscle weakness than necessary during fasting because they don't take salt or electrolytes. Fasting will deplete your electrolytes, but people do get through extended fasts on only water.
Further, enemas also deplete electrolytes. Excessively depleting the body of salt and electrolytes can be dangerous. As recently as February 2023, a 77-year-old Thai woman showed up at the emergency room with severe salt depletion after giving herself an excessive amount of enemas to relieve her constipation. Dora Williamson actually fainted during one of her particularly long enema sessions.
As for the exercise component of the Williamson sisters' so-called therapy, some exercise during a fast is actually a good idea.
While we're concerned about the muscle breakdown during a fast, the thing is that eating or not, the proteins in your muscles are always breaking down. However, healthy people are normally matching that muscle protein breakdown with muscle protein synthesis. To put on muscle, you just want to get your muscle protein synthesis higher than your muscle protein breakdown. There are 2 ways to increase muscle protein synthesis. The first is to eat protein. The second is to stimulate the muscles with exercise.
This highlights the importance of exercising during a fast to prevent your muscles from breaking down since you can't eat any protein.
But obviously, at some point, something has to give. You can't just fast forever and preserve your muscles with exercise and magic. Unfortunately, the issue with the Williamson girls is that they were already quite thin before even meeting Linda Hazard. It took just 17 days of fasting for Dora Williamson to become very gaunt and emaciated. After a couple weeks of fasting, one person commented that the girls were so thin that their skin appeared to be tightly drawn over their bones like wet sheets on a drying line. Even then, Linda Hazard continued to encourage the women to fast, saying that they were oh so close to being cured. While it may sound hard to believe, it has been confirmed time and time again that for most people, hunger disappears or significantly reduces after about 3 or 5 days of fasting. Back in the 1900s, the general rule of thumb, as laid out by Dr. Edward Dewey, was that people should stop fasting and eat something when their hunger returns. Upton Sinclair's 1911 book, The Fasting Cure, echoes this sentiment, detailing how depending on the person, the hunger would sometimes take more than 2, 3, or even 5 weeks to return. A 2021 paper explains that there are 3 phases to fasting. Phase 1 is when you switch from carbohydrate to fat as your main fuel source. The body begins to spare protein, which protects your muscles. They say in phase 2, you can coast along on body fat for fuel for weeks or even months for some people. During this second phase, hunger should be significantly reduced. However, at least in animals, when they get under 10% body fat, phase 3 begins. In phase 3, the body can't get enough energy from fat and begins to rapidly break down the muscles and organs for protein. So it may be that hunger returning suggests you are entering this rapid protein breakdown phase and you need to eat something very soon. Actually, the Williamson girls at one point were begging to be fed, but Linda Hazard refused. She said that they would die if they ate solid food. The girls were so psychologically manipulated that they willingly continued to fast while their bodies wasted away. They eventually became too weak to walk. After about 82 days straight of fasting, Claire Williamson had lost more than half her body weight, leaving her at just 50 pounds. She died of starvation on May 19th, 1911. Linda Hazard's bad intentions became pretty obvious when it was discovered that she had made a fake of Claire's will so that Hazard would receive all of Claire's belongings. She was even wearing one of Claire's dresses when a family friend came to rescue Dora. 10 days after her sister's death, Dora finally escaped and she survived. Linda Hazard was found guilty of manslaughter and went to jail for only 2 years. While clearly an insane con artist, Linda Hazard did truly believe in her fasting cure. In 1938, she tried to cure her own illness with fasting. She continued fasting until she died of starvation. Now, the contrast between Claire Williamson and Angus Barbieri's story illustrates the first and most obvious pitfall of fasting: fasting too much or too often. But what is too much? Well, apparently for Angus, an entire year wasn't too much. Angus's 382-day fast was medically supervised and a case report was published on it. He lost a total of 276 pounds over his year-long fast. While the authors of his case report asserted that he indeed lost some muscle, it wasn't to a serious degree. They wrote that prolonged fasting in this patient had no ill effects. So obviously, the difference is that Angus had way more body fat than the Williamson sisters. Clearly, someone looking like this should not have been fasting at all. Dr. Ted Naiman put it pretty simply: the thinner you get, the less I like extended fasting. The leaner you get, the more at risk you are of losing muscle when you fast really long or too often.
An ambulance will now take him to hospital.
Am I gonna be okay?
David Blaine's 44-day fast illustrates the second pitfall with fasting.
My bone mass index, everything had decreased by about 33%. I lost 60 pounds in 44 days.
But he lost much more muscle than he did fat. He lost an estimated 23 pounds of muscle, but only lost 14 pounds of fat. Here's the thing: if Angus Barbieri lost muscle at the same rate that David Blaine did, he would have died. So what did Blaine do differently? The body actually has many specific ways it protects your muscle when you fast, but if you wanted to lose as much muscle as possible during a fast, you should lock yourself in a giant box and suspend yourself above London so that you can't exercise or walk like David Blaine did. Tim Ferriss reported in Tools of Titans that he lost 12 pounds of muscle mass doing a 7-day fast. The fast was clinically supervised, and they specifically prevented him from exercising, which is a terrible idea. When Tim did another 10-day fast that included plenty of walking, he apparently didn't lose any muscle at all. You don't want to overdo the exercise during a fast, but not exercising at all is the second huge pitfall with fasting that will make you break down more muscle than is necessary. Jeff Nippard explained in a video of his that Matt, client of a friend of his, was hospitalized from a Crohn's disease flare-up. He was unable to exercise during that time, and he lost 35 pounds and most of his gains in just 2 months of not working out. Being unable to walk around or move much has been well known to rapidly atrophy your muscle for several decades. In fact, a study found that even though they were eating plenty of protein, subjecting 10 men to strict bed rest had them lose an average of 3 pounds of lean mass in just 1 week. On the other hand, a 2017 study had men stop working out for 2 weeks and simply letting them walk around, preventing them from losing any muscle. Now, another question came up when I found this 108-year-old textbook on fasting. It presented this weird data that a man was supposedly stronger than usual 7 days after he stopped eating. Then I came across a 2021 study on 16 men showing that their legs were much stronger than usual after 5 days without food. This didn't make any sense, so I decided to do a 3-day fast and see how much strength I lost. Not only did I not lose strength, I was able to deadlift 22 pounds heavier than the personal best I had hit 2 weeks earlier. Obviously, you can't grow muscle by not eating, so what's going on? First, let's look at how the body protects your muscle during a fast. As you can see from this 2012 study, during prolonged fasting, protein breakdown decreases to less than half of what it is normally. Going back to Angus Barbieri, his case report shows that his plasma urea dropped to less than half of normal, which would suggest he was breaking down less of his muscle proteins for energy. So what's going on is when you stop eating for about 8 hours or so, most people's bodies would shift to rely mostly on the stored sugar or glucose in your liver for energy. Around this time, you'd start to get pretty hungry, but your liver can only hold on to so much glucose to maintain your blood sugar. So what happens when your liver runs out of glucose? Well, let's talk about why I didn't go into a coma the other day. Your brain really cannot afford to have its fuel supply interrupted for even a moment. That's why this paper notes that when your brain fuel, your blood sugar, drops below 49, you're at risk of having a seizure or going into a coma. Yet, a couple weeks back, while I was on a diet of mostly steak, butter, and 0 carbs, my blood sugar dropped to about 39. But nothing happened. I felt fine. In fact, some crazy scientists in the 1980s took guys who had been fasting for days and injected them with insulin to purposely drive their blood sugar down. Now, normally, this is really dangerous. If this was outside of a medical experiment, they'd probably be accused of attempted murder. After the injection, one guy's blood sugar went all the way down to 9.
An individual getting down to 9 milligrams per deciliter. For the non-clinicians in the room, that level would cause coma in most people, and you'd be very close to death. They had absolutely no signs or symptoms of hypoglycemia or low blood sugar. Felt completely fine.
The thing is, when you naturally deplete your glucose stores, your body will generate an alternative fuel source called ketones. Ketones are made by breaking down fat. Of course, ketosis is the so-called fat-burning mode. And ketones are in fact considered to be an extra energy-efficient fuel for our bodies, providing more energy per unit of oxygen used. In 1910, an issue of the Los Angeles Herald newspaper had a column talking about the benefits of fasting. They mentioned that the first 3 days are the hardest. And I think anybody who's done a multi-day fast would agree that the first 3 to 5 days are indeed the hardest. This is likely due to the fact that your body is kind of in this limbo state where you're running low on glucose, but your body's glucose stores aren't quite low enough to give the signal to start producing plenty of ketones. Finally, on the 3rd or 4th day of a fast, when your ketone levels get really high, you should have a lot more energy and hunger should significantly reduce. So we would want to get out of this limbo zone and get your ketones up as fast as possible because ketones actually protect your muscles from breaking down. They reduce protein breakdown. A 1989 study found you can just inject ketones into people and will have their body hold onto protein more. A more recent 2022 study's cruel experiment revealed the potent muscle protecting effects of ketones. They tied rats' tails to the top of their cage so that the rat couldn't engage their hind leg. As we know, not stimulating the muscles will make them atrophy very rapidly. They found that if they injected the rats with a ketone body before tying them to the string, this significantly protected the rat's hind leg muscles from breaking down. One reason ketosis prevents muscle breakdown is because it reduces inflammation, and inflammation is known to atrophy the muscle. For example, injecting men with the highly inflammatory substance LPS will break down their muscle. However, a 2019 paper found that they could substantially protect the muscle from breaking down after an LPS injection by also injecting them with ketones. So the third pitfall of fasting is not getting into ketosis quickly enough. A good way to make your fast way harder is to binge on carbohydrates right before your fast. This will top up your glucose stores, and then it will take that much longer to burn off your stored glucose and get into ketosis. Actually, the 3-day fast I did recently was probably my easiest one yet. I had plenty of energy and not much hunger from day 1 because I was in deep ketosis even before the fast started. For about 2 weeks before, I had been eating 0 carbs and mostly just meat and butter. Another reason exercise is important, especially during the early stages of the fast, is that it will speed up how quickly you burn off that glucose and get into ketosis. But you might be worried that you couldn't possibly have any strength to exercise while you're fasting. But as I mentioned earlier, a 1915 textbook and a 2021 study found some markers of strength to be higher after 5 days without food. Also, as I mentioned, I hit a deadlift PR on the 3rd day of my fast. Now, that's still just one guy, one paper, and a 108-year-old textbook. If fasting for 3 days was really the secret to get another 20 pounds on your deadlift, all strength athletes would be fasting by now. Now, I wouldn't try to argue that you're going to build muscle during a long fast, but one thing that might be improving strength is the reduction in inflammation. In Upton Sinclair's 1911 book, The Fasting Cure, he claimed that 5 cases of arthritis were somehow cured by fasting.
Osteoarthritis can feel like broken glass on your joints.
When arthritis pain makes the stairs feel like a summit.
Arthritis is an inflammatory condition where the joints become inflamed and painful. In fact, a 1991 paper and a 2021 paper suggest that fasting can indeed improve arthritis symptoms. Further, inflammatory proteins have been associated with decreased strength in adults. The reason your muscles hurt so much when you have the flu is due to all the inflammation it provokes. Now, maybe I would have hit that PR even if I was eating. The most I'd argue is that strength can be preserved on a fast. But if there actually is a strength increase during 3, 5, or even a 10-day fast, it might be thanks to the anti-inflammatory effects of ketosis. Now, ketones indeed have various benefits, but they aren't magic. The longer you fast, the more muscle you're going to lose. In 2020, YouTuber Connor Murphy fasted for 40 days. It was done under medical supervision, and since it was for spiritual purposes, I presume he wasn't too worried about muscle loss. He indeed lost plenty of muscle. Back in 1983, George Cahill published a paper titled Starvation, where he explains that when you go into ketosis, the brain drastically drops its glucose requirements and can rely on ketones, so muscle protein is spared. However, the body still requires a little bit of glucose for certain processes, and it can make this glucose from fat or protein. Cahill says that fasting results in a reduction of protein breakdown from 75 grams daily to 12 to 20 grams daily. Now, that's great, but he didn't say it goes to 0 grams. So yes, you're going to lose some muscle if you fast, and you'll lose more the longer you fast. But when it comes to fasting, people often forget the big picture and get too bogged down on what happens during the fast. We need to ask what happens right after the fast. For example, testosterone is very important for building muscle, and it goes down during a fast. But as I discussed in another video, my testosterone nearly doubled after I ate again after my fast. Now, if we go back to the 2021 study that had 16 men fast for 10 days, they found that indeed during the fast, protein breakdown went down, which protected their muscle some. But after the fast was over, the protein oxidation stayed low, even after 3 days of refeeding. This means they could get the muscle protein synthesis stimulating benefits of eating protein at the same time that their muscle protein breakdown is being inhibited, meaning it should be easy to put on muscle mass right after the fast. Personally, this is why I think it makes the most sense to break a fast by slowly eating protein, so you can quickly rebuild what you lost. This is the fourth pitfall with fasting, not eating enough protein or calories when you are eating. Now, a 2021 study comparing intermittent fasting to a normal diet found that after 12 months, the intermittent fasting people's muscles had slightly shrunk. However, the people in the intermittent fasting group were eating about 200 calories and 15 grams of protein less than the other group. So obviously it's easier to maintain muscle on more calories and protein. What was interesting though was that while the intermittent fasting people's muscles physically shrank a little bit, they had a 15% increase in bench press strength, but the normal diet group only had a 10% increase. In any case, if you're trying to fast and increase or maintain your muscle mass, you need to be careful to eat sufficient calories and protein when you are eating. This is one reason why I stopped doing one meal a day. Indeed, it helped me lose plenty of weight, but it was pretty hard to eat 180 grams of protein in just one meal. Another reason it should be easier to put on muscle right after a fast is myostatin. Myostatin is a protein that inhibits muscle growth. In fact, Belgian blue bulls are very famous for being super jacked due to lacking myostatin. In the study on people fasting for 10 days, myostatin went up on the first day of fasting, but then decreased under baseline for the rest of the fast. And then it decreased significantly under baseline on the first refeeding day and went down further to about half of baseline by refeeding day 3. Seems like it would be a good idea to hit the protein and the weights after you break your fast. So the authors of that study concluded that, at least when it comes to fasting for 10 days, fasting combined with physical activity does not negatively impact muscle function. Walter Longo, a researcher who studies the rejuvenating effects of fasting, has explained on Rhonda Patrick's podcast that fasting is basically the trigger to prime the body to regenerate once you start eating again.
Then when you refeed, the muscle is rebuilt. I mean, we have evidence for regeneration in mice, we don't know yet in humans, but certainly the people go back to the normal muscle mass.
He says that while you temporarily lose some muscle, it will quickly be rebuilt upon eating again. He says this is pretty big because it means that fasting is a way to maintain lean body mass while losing fat. And Walter Longo says that protein is important for triggering this regeneration process.
Yeah, there is no doubt that when you refeed, you have to have sufficient protein to rebuild. So the whole system, of course, is set up to give the signals to rebuild.
So while you will likely lose some muscle during a fast, the body will quickly bounce back. However, there has to be a point where you break down the body and muscle too much by fasting too long or too often. So you don't want to overdo fasting. Personally, with my body composition, I don't think I would ever do longer than a 10-day fast. As you get leaner, it becomes a simple fuel availability problem. The obvious reason Angus Barbieri could fast so long was he was really fat. As you get leaner and leaner, you have less body fat that you can tap into for calories to support the body. When your fat stores get too low, your muscle starts to look extra tasty to your body and brain. Dr. Peter Attia, who used to be a huge proponent of fasting, said the reason he doesn't fast so much anymore was because he was losing muscle. However, he was fasting a lot, doing a 3-day fast every month and a 7 to 10-day fast 4 times a year. But he was also taking the longevity boosting drug metformin. Metformin has a side effect of making it harder to put on muscle, and some data suggest it may even atrophy the muscle. Further, older people may need to be more careful with fasting because as you age, it is harder to build and maintain muscle. Now, the 5th pitfall of fasting is not replacing electrolytes. People do get by on only water during long fasts, but it's much easier to keep your energy levels up, keep your hunger down, and get your exercise in when you're replacing those electrolytes you're losing. Salt is most important, but potassium and a bit of magnesium are also very helpful. This brings us to Element, which is the sponsor of this video. I started using Element even before they were a sponsor to get my electrolytes during a fast about 2 years ago. Electrolytes aren't only relevant when you're fasting, since electrolytes and sodium are a big part of hydration and maintaining the energy levels in general. It can really help to replace the electrolytes you lose when you're doing a low-carb diet or when you're sweating a lot at the gym. I often find my energy and focus is generally better throughout the day if I stay hydrated with plenty of water and an Element pack here and there. Element tastes great and there's no junk in it. It's just a good balance of electrolytes, sodium, potassium, and magnesium, a bit of flavoring, and some stevia. There's also a raw unflavored type if you prefer. If you go to drinklmnt.com/whatI'veLearned, you can get a free sampler pack with any purchase.
Also, be sure to try the new Element Sparkling. It's a bold, refreshing 16-ounce can of sparkling electrolyte water.